So we just interacted with the substance or the topic of half of my talk. Now we'll talk about, I guess I should tell you what the topic is. It's a mystery. So what was the first thing that came to mind when I said that? When I said that we just interacted with half of my talk, what did you think of?
Chanting.
Chanting. Yeah. Everyone's being shy.
My leg is dead.
Okay. Chanting is good. That's what we did, chanting. Chanting is a way to interact with spiritual energy. So if I write spirit on this side of the board, what am I going to write on this side of the board? Sometimes, yeah, matter. Sometimes Prabhupada would describe spirit as antimatter. Spiritual substance is non-material. It's the opposite of matter.
That's interesting.
And this could be spirit versus matter. Sometimes it is. It could also be spirit and matter. Because sometimes it's not like one, we have to deal with both. So they're not always at odds with each other. So what are some, if I say spirit, what are some things that come to mind?
The soul.
Soul. What else?
Inconceivable with material senses.
Say that again?
Inconceivable by material senses.
Inconceivable. I'll just say
Intangible or something. Okay, yeah.
inconceivable, intangible. Oh, can you, Dimitri, can you pass out the Bhagavad Gita? Wisdom, yeah, we could say wisdom. One could argue that there's material wisdom also, but that's fine. Wisdom, I guess wisdom in the true sense is more spiritual than material. This would probably be knowledge or facts or something. So, to that point, let's say facts, is that close enough? Inner knowledge, the data versus the understanding of it. So if we say this is soul, what would be the materialistic counterpart?
Body.
Right. Inconceivable means this is definable, right, or understandable. I'll say finite. Is that? Tell me if you don't agree with me. What are some? Another one I had was sometimes you hear the phrase "dead matter," right? We can debate this, but matter's dead. Matter needs a living force. Without life, matter doesn't move. A car doesn't drive without a driver. A body without a soul goes into the funeral home, or goes in somewhere else, goes into the ground. Let's see, what else did I have here? Temporary, did we put temporary and eternal?
We put finite on this side, but
We put what? Finite and inconceivable. That's kind of funny.
Right?
no, you just, I don't know, maybe you can take inconceivable out and put eternal there.
Oh, I see. Oh, well,
What do you mean?
no, eternal is a little
Eternal
different.
and temporary.
Eternal is temporary. Can everyone read this? I should probably have someone write with better handwriting.
We can read it.
Temporary. Eternal and temporary. I guess this should say infinite.
What?
Infinite versus finite.
Soul is infinite?
Spirit is infinite.
How can you know that?
No limit. You can experience it. What else? Temporary. Oh, okay. I have one more. So this is always changes, always changing. And this let's talk about that. I'll just say continuity. Let me talk about this. Well, this is really the same as eternal. But if you think, I'll give an example of this last one. If you think, what's the earliest memory you have? When you were 3 or 4 or 7 or 2 or 8? I don't know, I don't know how old I was. Probably 6 or 7. Did everyone have a memory of when they were young? So, how do you know that's you? How do you know that wasn't someone else? So the question, right? Because I was there. And yet, think back to when that memory that you have, and think of the body you were in. If I had a photograph of that memory, would it look the same as you look now? The same body you're in now? Maybe it was a little smaller. So there's an example that the continuity is there. That was I. The sense of I, that was me. That same I that experienced is the same I here, because I have that memory. That's continuity. The body was different. It was a 7-year-old body. Now I'm in an older body. It was small, it was short. Maybe it had the hair was longer, or different color, or shorter, or whatever. The material covering was different. So that's what I mean by continuity versus it changes. So now open your books and go to chapter 2, text 17. And somebody read, maybe read the translation. 2:17. chat. Can you do the translation?
Sure. That which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul.
Okay, so which one is that talking about? Spirit, right? Okay, so let me read 2:18.
Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both.
It's 2:18, right?
No, it's good. It's not?
Yeah.
Sounds
You did it
different than
2:18?
what I
Oh, I'm
remember.
sorry, I read 2:16. That's weird.
It's similar, but
The material body of indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living and the entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore, fight, both send it apart.
did everyone follow that? Sure to come to an end. It's temporary. So if we're seeking, okay, let me get another color here. I'm going to say, I don't know if this is the right term. Universal, meaning these facts here, the fact that the spirit and matter, spirit versus matter, all of these things, right? Inconceivable, it's alive, the soul is there, the body is there. This is probably an American concept. True or false? Yes? True? So this doesn't apply if you're Chinese or if you're Iranian or if you're born in Mexico? It doesn't? It does. You were saying it was an American. You were nodding yes when I said
Yeah.
American.
I thought it was like what Americans think.
I mean, I
It-
think
The words might be different. These are English words, so they might have different terms, but I'm sure in Mexico they have a word for soul, right? They have a word for alive and dead and temporary and eternal. Chinese, Iran, South Africa, so it's universal. These concepts are universal, is my point. This isn't a cultural thing. This doesn't apply whether you're Christian, whether you're Buddhist, whether you're Hindu. Do these things change? No. So these aren't religious concepts. They're scientific concepts based on matter and spirit. One could argue, or I would propose. Why this is important is because if we're looking to be happy, does anyone want to be unhappy? If we're looking to be happy and peaceful, we want to spend our energy over here. Because our identity, as Bhagavad Gita teaches us, is here, right? In the soul. We're spiritual beings. So all these things apply. These things apply to the body. So if we spend our energy over here, if we just spend all of our waking time and efforts focusing on things on this side, we'll end up feeling unsatisfied and frustrated. So we want to chant, we want to meditate, we want to think for children's wisdom, right? Do we want to just have a whole bunch of facts and we can quote anything, or do we want to understand, well, how do I make sense of those facts? How do I put that knowledge to use, right? That's more over here. Otherwise, we get entangled. The tricky thing is that we mention this a lot. We have, I'm not quite sure how to draw this. We have earth, air, fire, water, and ether. These are all material elements. They make up the body. And I'm going to purposely draw it. Mind, intelligence, and false ego. So these our subtle elements, they're still material. So the point is, we don't want to focus all our energies over here. If we examine our body, it's made up of material elements. It gets a little tricky when we get to mind, intelligence, and ego. They're subtle. The Bhagavad Gita explains they're still material. It's subtle. It's like fog is more subtle than the wall, but it's still a material thing. And so we don't want to spend all of our energy driving to gain facts and put all of our efforts into things that are temporary and going to change, such as our body and our mind and our ego, because it's illusory. That's the other one I should have written. I mean, illusory is a tough one because it's kind of a whole other class. Matter is not, some people will say that the whole material world is an illusion, and it is and it isn't. It's real. This wall is here, my body is here. It's not like I can't say I don't exist. It's temporary, and so over time it will cease to be. So it's illusory in that sense. That's a whole other topic, so I'll take illusion off. But the point is, if all of our consciousness and efforts and time and energy is spent with material energies, then we end up feeling very isolated, depressed, afraid, because it's not real. It's not the soul. This is reality. This is who we are. We're spiritual beings. The tricky part of this is everyone can pretty much agree. I don't know. I mean, there may be somebody who would debate it, but most people would agree that these are material things. I think it's pretty hard to argue that they're not. Understanding that mind, intelligence, and ego are matter is a whole nother level of understanding. Yes?
I agree that most people will agree that those are matter, but some people will also say that that's all there is. They don't accept a soul. They just say that they are those things, that that's who they are.
Well, they can say that, but that doesn't mean that's true. That doesn't mean that they are. Yes, it's true. Some people just say, I'm a body, and at the end of life, that's it. There's nothing else after this. It's like, fine, if you want to live that way, you can. I would find that very depressing and discouraging, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you look at the sophistication involved in the body, what it takes to function, just from a medical or scientific point of view, it's a lot of energy and a lot of sophisticated wiring and network for there to be no purpose. That just doesn't make sense. That's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. So somebody will. People do. A lot of people say, hey, eat, drink, and be merry. That's all there is to life, and you die, and that's it, and this body is all there is. And it's like, that's fine if you want to live that way. It makes no sense to me that is all there is. For one reason, because this is not logical. For two, once you've experienced some of these things, then you know that's not true, because you've experienced the eternal nature of the soul.
Can we experience wisdom without intelligence?
Yes. Yes, because why intelligence is on this side? Because it's material.
Yeah, I know.
The soul, so let me write, that's a good question. So if I'm saying this is all of this is matter, then we need an equivalent over here, right? Because we have a list of material things, we have a list of spiritual things, and I didn't give you the spiritual equivalent of this list. Am I making sense? So since we're not those things, what are we? I have to write this inside. I'm trying to be symmetrical, sorry. We are Sat, Chit, Ananda. That says Ananda. If you can't read, it's because I can't write. I'll try to write it. Okay. So we're not our body. We're not our material elements. We're not our mind, and not our intelligence, and not our ego. So the question is, well, two questions. The question is, if we're none of these things, then what are we? And to your question, how can we experience wisdom without intelligence? Satchidananda is the DNA of the soul. Sort of like if H2O is what makes up water, Satchidananda is what makes up the soul. That's the ingredients we're made of, is Satchidananda. Sat is a Sanskrit word, it means eternal. Right, we had that one down here. Chit means it's full of knowledge. Now in this sense, it's more of the wisdom of knowledge than just a bunch of facts. It's we understand. And Ananda means bliss, happiness, or bliss, more specifically, that love, that we interpret as satisfying emotion exchange, bliss. So the point is, these three things are what makes up the soul. They're spiritual. So with this chit, that's your answer. That chit is full of knowledge. That's wisdom. It does not require mind, intelligence, or ego to be present or to function. It may manifest through those, but it does not require them.
I have a question that's kind of like back about something you said before.
Okay.
So, I'm still kind of stuck on why we should focus on spirit more than matter, because matter is what we can see. Why would we waste our time focusing on something we can't even see instead of just like appreciating what we have?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So that's why I wrote this. Right? It's not versus, it's not and, it's both. Sometimes you need to choose one or the other. So, but sometimes you need them both, which is why I put it in there. So I'll give an example. I'm going to come to your question backwards, and we'll come to your questions. So Prabhupada talks about this. Srila Prabhupada is the person who brought this Bhagavad Gita, these teachings to us. And he talks about being dependent, right? How somebody asked him once, are we dependent? Does the soul have to have a body? And he said, well, yes and no. First he said yes. He said we require it because we're dependent on it, because we don't understand any of this. But as you understand this, you don't need a body. He gave the example of a donkey. Sanskrit, it's called mudha, an ass, a donkey, an animal that's not very intelligent. And this donkey, sometimes you'll see they hang a bag over it full of grain that the donkey can just eat while it's working. But regardless, they'll give it some grass, they'll put 500 pounds of load on it, and have this donkey carry these rocks down this trail up the mountain. At any point, the donkey can run off to the side and eat all the grass it wants. There's grass everywhere. But the donkey is thinking, I have to carry this load because he's going to give me some grass when I'm done. And so he carries the load, and then the master gives him some grass, the donkey's all happy, and then the donkey lets him put more rocks, and he carries them off in another direction. If the donkey just shook off the rocks and ran away, he could eat all the grass he wants. It's all over the field that he's walking next to. But he's thinking, I have to carry this load. So the point is, we think we're this body. So then we're bound by these things, and we think, well, I have to accept birth, death, old age, disease. I have to accept all these limitations because I don't have a choice. Well, that's because we think we're our mind, intelligence, and ego. We think we're our body. If I think of my body, I have to eat, and then my happiness is based on all of these things. My happiness is based on what people think of me. My happiness is based on how much money I have, or how I look, or what degree I have. But when we understand, no, I'm a spiritual being, my happiness is not based on these things external. My happiness is based on internal. Well, then we're not dependent on it. So the point, I think, to answer your question, Simran, is that another example is that if you want to chop down a tree, because you need to build a house, you can take a branch of that tree, make an axe, and then chop down the tree. So you can use a part of that tree to destroy the tree. Not that we want to destroy trees, we like trees, but sometimes we have to. The principle is that we can use these material elements. We can use the body, we can use the mind, intelligence, and ego to understand things spiritual. Your question about seeing or not seeing, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go with that. We don't see the air, but we're dependent on it. We have to breathe. There's a lot of things we don't see. Just because we don't see it with our eyes, I mean, what things do we see? The reality is we don't see a whole lot. If we walk outside, right now we're seeing everything fine. If you go turn off that switch, we can't see anything. Our eyes are still here. The power of seeing isn't within us. The power of seeing is in the light. And so our ability to see something, I mean, that could be a whole topic in itself. There's seeing the actual thing, and then there's the wisdom to understand, well, what are we really seeing and what does it mean, processing that information. So I would propose that whether we can see something or not isn't so important. It's what effect do these things have upon us, whether we can see them or not. There's a lot of things we can't see that have a great effect upon us. I don't know if that helps. I'm giving you like 3 different half answers.
I just love this. I just read this. Prabhupada said, someone asked him about seeing, you know. And Prabhupada said, what can we see? He said, in an airplane, he said, the pilot can see on the clearest day, best case scenario, maybe 10 miles. And the plane's going at 600 miles an hour. So what good is seeing 10 miles ahead? So
It needs to be able to see a lot further.
yeah, you have to be able to see if you're going to conduct the plane like that. So there's so much that goes on that you're not dependent on seeing at all. Another example.
So does that answer your question, or did I understand
No,
your question?
I like your points, but I'm just like wondering, like, so it seems like you're saying, well, you didn't really say this, but I think one of the things you're saying is that by focusing on spirit rather than matter, or maybe along with matter, you can be happier than you would be the other way around. But I don't really understand why we wouldn't just be happy with matter.
Because they're temporary, they change, there's no life in them, they're finite. So happiness, again, happiness has to have 2 qualities to be accepted as happiness. And you're smiling, so I know you know what they are. What are those 2 qualities?
Always increasing and never ending.
It never ends, and it increases. Now you can argue, but I'm fine with this other happiness. That's fine. If you want some pleasure and it doesn't have those qualities, everyone's free to do that. The whole world is seeking after that. I would prefer to have a happiness that doesn't end and always increases.
Right. So what you're
And
saying is
you're not going to get that over here.
because it's
It
temporary.
doesn't exist because it's temporary.
Gotcha.
There's no material substance that you're going to find that doesn't change eventually and it lasts forever. That might last millions of years, but eventually it's going to break down. And so your happiness lasts millions of years. Well, that's great. What happens about in 2 million years? Whereas over here, it's forever. It's eternal.
I have a question.
Yes.
You kind of mentioned it a while back. What side would you put logic on? Where does logic come
Good question.
I think I have an answer for that.
Go ahead.
So I think there's like 2 types of logic. So there'd be like material logic and then spiritual logic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are they different?
So I think the logic we deal with on a daily basis, like what most of our scientific stuff is based upon, is material. And I think the spiritual logic, most of us don't even know it right now because we don't. So yeah.
I agree with that answer. It's on both sides. The question is to the difference is what's the purpose? Logic is to achieve some conclusion, right? You're gonna logically think about something to come to some conclusion. So what's your goal? What's your conclusion? What are you trying to achieve with the logic? What question are you trying to answer or accomplish with your logical? Is that goal over here or is it over here?
Well, ultimately, logic is the goal is logic is to discover some wisdom, right?
It's what?
Then it's
To
over
discover
here.
some
To
wisdom.
some wisdom. What one would hope.
Right.
Some people, the goal of their logic may be to just build a better mousetrap, which is not. So yeah, I would agree with you, but I would counter there may be people that use logic that don't have that lofty goal. And you can still say it's logic, it's just, what's the point? It seemed very logical. No, Shika had a question, and then we'll come to you. Sorry.
So my question, you answered kind of like half of my question. So my question was actually, can soul exist without the matter? And if so, how and why? So you kind of said some things about it, but like...
It's eternal. So it's a good... Go ahead, finish.
No, it's, yeah, I understand it's eternal, and I could, like, we cannot see it. What I try to understand is kind of, it's just a form of energy that you cannot see. Like, at least to make my material mind understand and visualize how things happen. So I believe that there is a soul, like, I have always been. So it's kind of a form of energy that's there. But, like, can it be just wander around without a body? Or is it just...
So this gets into a deeper discussion. And this kind of gets back to Simran, why we want to spend energy over here versus over there. Because the soul's eternal, this is not. And so we want to be conscious of that eternality. We don't want to be afraid of dying or afraid of our shadow or bound up with this temporary stuff. It's not dependent on this stuff, but right now it is dependent on that stuff. Because we have material desires, and because we're living over here, and we think we're this body, and we think we're mind and intelligence, we need a material body to exercise those desires.
But as you said, like when you said that once you actually realize things, you don't need your body. So
Right.
if there is a person who is like very, you know...
Keyword you just said, which answers the other part of your question. So yes, it's a force, it's a life force, it's eternal. Sat means it's eternal, that's the force. It's chit, it's full of knowledge. Now that's not just a force, now there's some cognizance. And there's ananda, there's personality. So your personality, what makes you you, it's not just a force. A force is an impersonal thing, like electricity.
But if that, okay, so if a person dies, his soul doesn't go to the ultimate place, it will go to some other body, right?
So let's back up to your first statement. A person dies. Let's.
So the body dies.
Thank you.
The body dies, and the soul actually like leaves the body and goes to some
somewhere
other
else.
body.
Yes.
Does it remain the same? Like the personality or the characteristics of that soul, does it remain the same, or is it?
Were you the
changes?
same person? So go back to that memory you had of when you were 6 or 5 or 7, whatever the memory was. Do you remember? You have a memory of when
Yeah.
you were. Was that the same person as you? Now maybe some things are different, like you're older and you have more experience.
Body's different, person's the same.
But was it you?
Yeah, like
But it was a different you. It was maybe that person wasn't you. It was really Rashmi.
but doesn't the situation impersonates on the soul? Like fine, like I have been grown, like my parents have grown me up in a certain way. But if my soul leaves my body and goes to somebody else's body, that person would be raised in a different environment and have a
So
different thinking.
this is a very good question. I don't know. Where's my clock?
It's mind and intelligence.
Yes,
It's
but
material.
7 and
So
7.
your answer, you just answered your question, and Dimitri's helping you. So this is a very important concept, and this is what differentiates Bhakti Yoga from every other kind of yoga and teaching out there, is this personality. You're talking about a personality. Now how that personality, which is a unique set of characteristics, how that personality expresses themselves in the material world is through our mind, intelligence, and false ego. These things are not us. And this is where it gets complicated, because we're so ingrained. The false, I put false ego because there's a true ego, our real being. The false ego, ahankara, is the sense of I'm doing something. I'm the controller. I am my body, I'm my mind and my intelligence. That sense of I am these things, that's the false ego. The real ego, without false, that's the Atma, that's this, Satchidananda. So if you summarize, let me use a different color. Where's my brown? So if we took these, all 3 of these, that's the Atma, the soul. That's the personality, right? that's in a pure sense. When it comes through matter and we forget, we think we're this body, then it manifests psychologically as these characteristics, that characteristic, that's mind, intelligence, and false ego.
So that should basically mean that every person's soul is same.
No. No.
Then why not? Because if the
Because this Satchidananda is, because that's not what Bhakti Yoga teaches. Because every person is a unique entity with different likes and dislikes.
so every soul has a unique
Yes.
entity and
Every soul has a unique personality.
okay, personality and
So,
This is really important. This is really important. The Supreme also has a unique personality.
Is it possible that soul understands that it is a soul without mind?
Yes,
Yes.
that's Chet, knowledge.
so okay, I feel,
It knows.
okay, real quick. So I
Think,
think,
sorry, mind, think of mind as a master sense. Mind just controls the senses. It's like a sixth sense. You have
It's
five
like
senses.
Thinking. I'm
The
thinking.
mind,
It's mind
the
work,
mind
right?
only is capable of doing two things. It's like a small child. The mind is not very, the mind can accept and reject. That's all it can do. It's not very sophisticated. Simran, what was your question?
sorry about that. It wasn't a question. It was just that, so basically she was asking if like the soul stays the same, right? Or something like that?
yeah.
So I'm thinking that there's, like we were saying about logic, there's a material intelligence and a spiritual intelligence. The spiritual intelligence that your soul gains in this body, that stays. But the material one is temporary, so that doesn't stay.
But basically that means that the soul also grows.
It doesn't,
Like
The soul gets uncovered. The soul is covered by these material energies.
So
It has experiences.
Hmm?
So
Basically,
with
it's the same.
experiences,
The
that
soul?
it
Yeah.
doesn't change.
For
same as
everyone.
what?
No, everyone's different.
The covering.
Yeah, it
The cover?
changes.
Oh, I see.
The
So
soul
it's
is
static.
covered.
It changes.
Yeah.
But then if it changes, then it's not.
So
The
when-
difference is it's eternal. So it's changing means it's always new, it's always fresh, it's always different. This changing means decay,
Okay.
right? Material things change and decay. There's a law of physics, I forget what it's called. Elements always separate and simple. They become less. A complex thing breaks down into simple things. I can't think of the law.
So basically,
Things
like,
decay.
we could say that soul is some kind of.
First law of thermodynamics. Sorry.
Or it's the second or something.
Yeah, it's one of the laws that energy falls down into a simpler state. That's the material energy. That's what it does. Sorry, go ahead.
So now I was just trying to conclude and think in my head that okay, so the soul is a soul has a personality, it
Yes.
has energy, and it has own knowledge, and then every person has a unique personality, a unique soul, not to like.
So everyone is a unique soul.
Everyone
It
is
a
a
personality.
Is a personality and it's a unique soul. And when a body dies and that soul goes to another body, that particular soul remains the same,
Yeah.
but due to the material dependency,
Cover. Yeah. Right.
the body in which the soul is, it's different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can give an example, and then we'll come back. Sorry, we're 1-2. Look at Ramya. She's in a female young girl's body. She walks up to the piano and she just starts playing. I'm convinced her last life she was a musician. Because at 2 years old, she's been doing that for a year and a half. She'll just walk up and start playing. She doesn't know how to make notes yet, so it's not music, but there's some natural propensity to play piano. Now in her last life, maybe she was a man. Who knows? But so the personality, the characteristic of is manifested differently. But there's a certain personality there. So you had a comment on her point, and then we'll come to your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, the soul is covered by the subtle energies, mind, intelligence, and false ego, and then the gross energies. So when the soul drops the gross energies, it takes with it the subtle energies, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So that will go into another body, and that's how the karma gets transferred, right?
So kind of it impersonates on the soul.
Well,
Well, it's a covering.
Okay.
It's a
it's
covering.
like a glove. Like you
Yeah.
put a glove over your hand.
Yeah, it's a covering. But the soul has form The soul has a personality, but it's not just kind of like an ethereal personality. It's a person. We are a person, and we have form,
So,
spiritual
So
form.
let me just clarify one.
We have a spiritual body. We have a spiritual body, and it's covered right now. See, the thing is
Yeah.
that the soul, in the
That's
Bhagavad
intense.
Gita you'll read, that the soul, the size of the soul, you know what the size of the soul is? 1/10,000th the tip of a hair. So take one of your hairs
Take the tip, cut it in 100
and
pieces.
cut it into 100 pieces, and take one of those pieces and cut it into 100 pieces, and that's the size of the soul. It's phenomenal, you know.
But
it's
it
hard
has
to
a definite
understand.
structure to it.
It definitely has a form. It has
Like some kind of definite boundaries.
It
in
could be a person or form like we
Yeah.
have. It could be a cow's form. It could be the form of a blade of grass. It could be a form of a tree. All these different souls exist eternally in the spiritual world,
Okay.
and we're one of those.
And a sage sees the same, whether it's a tree or a dog or a brahmana, they're all the same. They all have a soul. So they're equal in that sense. One point about, as we go to another body, this mind is subtle covering. Mind goes with us until we get free of this material conception. Then eventually these are given up because they're not eternal. Mind and the ego are not eternal. But it talks about these going with us like an air carries aroma. You can smell a rose because of the air. So we go in another body, and this is what forms our next body. Our mind, intelligence, and ego, our desires, our conceptions. Then nature says, okay, if that's what you want to experience, here's a suitable body to experience that. This is what mind, intelligence, and false ego is what determines that body that we're going to get. But eventually the goal is not to be dependent on medias, return back to just our pure personality, then we don't need mind, intelligence, and false ego, because we've got such an ananda. So you had a question.
I got a new question right now, like what you said.
Okay, you get two questions because I took so long to come talk.
Just now you said that you want to experience something, so you go to that body to experience something. So I had something similar like that, the law of attraction, but I didn't understand what it was and what this is.
Yeah. It's described in the Bhagavad Gita that you're holding in your hand, that which we're desiring, what we're thinking about at the time of death, when we leave this body, that determines the next body we go into. So the type of mind, intelligence, and false ego we've developed, meaning what are our desires, what are we pulled to, what are we attracted, what do we want to do? I can give some crude examples. If we really love eating things with blood flowing out of them, like heavy meat, we could take a body of a tiger, right? And a tiger is much more suited to eating things. Prabhupada used to give the example of surfers. We want to go swimming. We sit on a surfboard and play in the water. We can take the body of a porpoise and swim on the waves much better than we can on a surfboard. Or if we like to fly, some people, they go to pilot school, they learn how to fly, they just spend all their time in the air, then we can take the body as a bird and fly to your heart's content. These are crude examples, but if we want to be a president, we want to be a CEO, we have some material desire, whatever our desires are, then we get a suitable body. We're born into a family, a wealthy family, or whatever, political family, then we can achieve those desires. We're given a suitable body. Does that help?
Does that explain the law of attraction?
Is that your lot? Yeah.
And,
You had one more.
how does that work? I mean, who decides?
It's mystical. You decide, ultimately. I mean, God, the laws of nature will give you a suitable body, but you decide based on your desires.
Yeah, desire is very close to the soul, right?
Desire is close to the soul.
Desire is what the soul does.
In fact, in terms of control, desire is the only thing you have. Because we can't, this ahankara, what makes this ahankara so entangling is we think we're the doer. We think we can control things. But we can't control things. And the example I always use is robotics. You don't study robotics, do you? So if you're going to build a robot, and you want to tell it to take a drink of water, right? Let's just say this is glass. I got one of these from Adobe that's made out of glass. So I'm going to build a robot that when I say I'm thirsty, it picks up this and drinks water. So and I'm not just making this up, I'm making up this example, but I've talked to students who study robotics and they say it's actually much more complicated than what I'm going to explain. So if I'm going to build this robot, I've got to write code and tell it, okay, when I push the button to say water, reach over and pick this up. Now the lines of code it's going to take to tell it what angle to go, grab the glass, don't hold it too tight because you just broke the glass. Don't hold it tight enough, you dropped it. Now tip it up to your mouth. Oh, now you just poured water all over yourself because you got to like turn it. Okay, now you have to turn the lid. There's thousands of lines of code just to deal with the bones. There's other millions of lines of code to deal with the electrical system and the muscles and the nervous system, and they all have to work together. Do you think of any of that when you get a drink of water? I don't.
But I practiced it when I was a baby growing up.
Practice
I know how
what?
to drink water when I was growing up.
But you told your
And I
muscles,
learned
okay,
it,
move
yeah.
it 30 degrees and put 15 pounds of pressure, and then now twist it 45 degrees this way. Is that what you thought of?
It was more subtle.
It's much more subtle. All you think is, I want water. And so, yeah, you have to learn to move your muscles, but all you do is practice. Learning is just repetition. You don't know how your muscles move. Do you know how your heart beats? Do you know how the chemicals in your body create electrical signal to make your heart beat? Do you know how that works? What chemicals? What do you mean you don't know? It's beating. You must know. It's working. Right? The point is we don't know. And Super Soul does know. So Super Soul is living in the heart, Paramatma, and it's making these functions work. And so my point is we have no control over all these things. We have no control over any of this. Ahankara makes us think we do. And so then we think we're controlling our functions. But back to the earlier point, is the desire. All we have is the desire to manipulate material energies. And then Super Soul gets in. That's a whole other class, just talking about Super Soul.